All right, everybody. Welcome to the call. Thanks for coming. We have Cole McLean with Reside Financial here today with us to give us the market update. So Cole, take it away, sir.
Thanks, Rosie. Good morning, everyone. Hope you guys are all well, getting ready for the holidays. So what I just wanted to briefly chat about, I'm sure most of you know that last week we had the Fed meeting. So, we did see the Fed rate drop another quarter. Unfortunately, per usual, mortgage rates, I wouldn't say they necessarily went up, but they definitely didn't reduce. They kind of stayed stagnant. And over the last week since then, we've basically seen the same thing. So it's one of those kind of ploys, I would call it, where usually after we see the Fed meeting, mortgage rates always tend to tick up a hair or stay stagnant. But we do have some big items coming out still this week. We have the jobs report that will play a factor into rates. So, once that comes out tomorrow, we may see a little tick down if we get some good data there. But I think through the end of the year, we're probably just going to stay right kind of where we are, those average rates kind of in those mid to low sixes with those top tier borrowers, through the end of the year. So I don't see much adjustment. Other than that, what I'm seeing in the marketplace on the mortgage side of things, definitely a lot of seller concessions coming in. So you guys are all doing a great job at, helping your clients get a little extra concessions, keep those cash to closes lower. It seems just to be a great time to be able to get the buy downs, all of those things with this market moving a little bit slower. Sellers being eager, to move on to the next home or move out of state, whatever they're doing. I think we have the ability to really, work those purchase agreements. So short and sweet this morning, unless you guys have any questions. That's really it. We're always here for you guys, Matt, Kyle, and I. So reach out and feel free to bounce anything off of us.
Awesome. Thanks, Cole. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, guys, I have a couple reminders for you before we move into tech. First things first is we have a monthly agent meeting tomorrow, and it's going to be a little different. So we're starting at 9 a.m. We're going to be at a listing of Jenny Bliss, and it's also a renovation by Redevelopment Group, one of our vendor partners. We're opening up the house at 9 a.m. and then we'll start the meeting at 10 a.m. So please come early. We'll have coffee and we'll have breakfast. It is a stupid cool house. I would love for you guys to come and find the secret tunnel, find the Hobbit bathroom. It is so cool. So I hope you guys can join us, and Mark will be talking about the love of his life, Lawrence Yun, and his economic predictions for real estate market in 2026. So hope you can join, and hope you can join virtually too. Lafayette is having a really fun watch party at their office. So yeah, can't wait to be with all of you tomorrow. And then the other thing that I wanted to remind you of is we launched our continuing education series. So we're doing something also a little bit different for continuing ed this year. We're doing every Tuesday morning in January. We are doing a couple of hours of continuing education. If you come to all of them, you can knock out your whole 12 hours for the whole year in January. Just get it done while it's cold and awful outside. So hope you can join us for that. That is only in person in Indianapolis at the Girl Scouts headquarters over on the near west side. I'll drop the link in the chat once I'm done talking. Also, holidays are coming up. Happy Christmas to everyone. Or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate. Remember that this call is canceled for the next 2 weeks because it falls on Christmas Eve and on New Year's Eve. So this is the last time that you get to see me and Megan and Mark's lovely faces for the rest of the year. So I believe I already canceled those calendar invites, but I'll double check that. And if not, I'll go ahead and cancel them later today. Also, as a part of the holiday announcement, that week in between Christmas and New Year's, we typically run a skeleton crew staffing wise. So our office will be sparsely populated. We'll also be working and checking our email and such. But just so you know, you won't see us around as much. We try to spend some cozier time and restful time at home during that week. And I hope you guys get to do that as well. Okay, on to my favorite portion, which is tech. I want to give a quick shout out before I jump into today's lesson. If you guys don't know Abe Rickenberg, he is an agent with us, and he sends out the most lovely e-campaign every single week that I get, and I just wanted to show you how cool it is. So I'm going to share my screen. If you don't know Abe, you really should, because he is an absolute delight. And the big thing that you should know about Abe is he is an insane runner, like ultra marathon runner, runs all the time, probably every day, I think. Yeah, I love talking to him about running because I hate running and he loves it. And it's just a fun conversation. But he sends out this e-campaign every week that blends his two loves of running and real estate. He calls it the Weekly Stride. And he does spotlights on local races and events happening for his clients. And then he talks about real estate for a little bit. And then I want to point out the way he blends these at the bottom. I'm going to read this paragraph to you because I just think it's, he puts something like this in every e-campaign, and I think it's so beautiful. Don't let the holiday hustle add stress to your home transition. Moving, much like race day, requires a great plan and an experienced guide. If you're planning your next move, let me partner up with you to ensure your entire process is seamless, peaceful, and crosses the finish line on time. I just think, you know, I think a lot of realtors brand themselves in a way that they're combining like loves or making themselves stand out. And I feel like Abe has done such a good job of adding value to people. I always love seeing what races are coming up and like kind of seamlessly infusing that with real estate. I just think it's a beautiful way for him to show up as an actual human being to people and also offer help. So I just wanted to show you guys that because I think sometimes it can be hard to grasp how to use the eCampaign tool well and how to market to your clients, but also show up as a human being. And I think Abe is doing a really fantastic job at that. So hats off to you, Abe. Okay, if you remember, last week we talked about, or I gave you a challenge that I want you to spend 20 minutes a day for the rest of the year cleaning up your CRM, because I think the CRM is the heart of your business, and it's how you hold relationships really well. And you can only hold those relationships well if your data is super clean. So I challenge you to get into your CRM, and I have another challenge for you today. And I'm going to use some Ninja language on you. So if you have not gone through Ninja, bear with me a little bit. I'll try to explain as much as I can. But Ninja has this great concept and this great challenge for real estate agents that it wants you to do real estate reviews for your clients. And I think Ninja is challenging you to do 2 per week, but I would just say whoever your clients are, you should be giving them a real estate review once per quarter. Some of you are like, what is a real estate review? Real estate review is an update on their asset. So it's a client who is currently living in a home, and you are creating a report for them on what has happened to their asset in the last 90 days. So giving them a quarterly report on, hey, what has sold in their area, in their neighborhood, and how much equity have they gained in the last quarter. It's an amazing way to establish yourself as a very professional person who is helping them mind their asset. And I think it's a great way to stay in touch with your clients. I think Ninja has a lot of information on this, so I'm not even going to try to delve in all the way, but I think you can do these in a couple of different ways. You can either try to meet up with your clients quarterly in person. I know that's a big ask, but maybe you do that just for your A clients. Your clients who are like cream of the crop, try to meet up with them quarterly, grab them a beer and give them an update on what's going on with their asset. You can also do a call if you try to schedule a quarterly call with your clients to talk to them about their house. And then the last thing that you could do is you could drop off an actual report for them, do a porch drop, drop it in their mailbox, and then follow up with them later. So I want to address the physical report that you should be bringing with you in all three of those scenarios. And I want you to use our CMA tool to do that. I think our CMA tool is amazing and really pretty. And it has a really awesome print functionality that curates a really nice, easy report for you that you can really quickly print off and send to your clients. So I am in platform here, and I'm going to hit on digital CMA. I'm going to go to a CMA that I already have created, and I'm actually not going to demo the tool for you today because I feel like I've demoed it a lot recently. But if you want me, or if you want more information on how to actually create the report, I can send that to you. But what I wanted to show you today is how to actually print it off. So when you get into the CMA and you have it all created, you're going to see this button down here that says print. And I'm going to hit on that. And then it's going to give you 3 different options of how long you want the report to be. I usually go with this middle one because it gives a great summary and listing detail page. This last one, the larger file, is going to have literally every listing photo from every listing that you choose. It's I think great, but it's just a lot. So I choose the middle ground here, and I'm going to hit print, and it's going to render this report for me. And you can just print this report, stick it in one of our folders. We have tons of pocket folders in all of our offices, and then send it to your client, meet up with them and bring it, porch drop it for them. I am going to share my screen in a different way so you can see this report. Hang tight. Okay. This is what my CMA looks like. Can you guys see that? Okay, I'm assuming you can. It's just going to have this really gorgeous report, and I think it's as easy as that. You're going to pull comps for them, print off this report, and drop it to them, and then have a conversation about what this means for their house. Really simple, easy way to make yourself look really professional and to have a great touch point with your clients. So that is my challenge for you. Last week was clean up your CRM data. This week, get really familiar with the CMA tool and use it for real estate reviews. Okay, that's all I have for you. Over to Megan Sullivan.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Little nail gun action this morning at 16th Street, so hopefully that's not too distracting for you. But today is the day that I get to nerd out about contracts, and you all know that I love it. So we are super lucky, most of you know this, to live in a state with standardized forms. So most real estate transactions in Indiana are done on the same purchase documents, and those are managed by our state association. And each year at this time, they announce changes to those forms that will roll out on January 2nd. And today I'm going to just go over the highlights of those changes. We don't have the actual forms. We just know the language that they're changing now. And then on January 2nd, when you come back to work, rested and refreshed, they will just magically be in your DocuSign and Dotloop accounts. Great news. I think it's great news. There were 0 changes to the listing contract and the buyer agency contract. And so we are going to leave our forms alone as well. So there won't be any changes to that. There are, however, a couple significant changes to the purchase agreement that I want to make sure you're aware of. So I'm just going to pull them up here for you. Share my screen and go through them really quickly. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, so we're going to start with the purchase agreement, like I mentioned. first change is as it relates to possession. Sorry, I gotta move my little window here. Basically, they are taking out any pre and post closing possession out of the purchase agreement and forcing it onto a pre or post closing agreement addendum, or it's not an addendum, it's just a separate agreement. Those forms have existed for a long time, but basically in order to clarify the terms of any pre-closing or post-closing possession, that will now be on a separate form, already exists. You can go look at it right now in DocuSign if you want. And basically your only option in the purchase agreement will be to either have possession at closing or reference one of those agreements. It's also taking out the language about any cost associated, obviously, with post-closing possession, because that will now be in that agreement. So I'm just going to keep going, and if anybody has questions, just interrupt me or put them in the chat. So there you can just kind of see what it's going to look like with all that stuff removed and added as it relates to possession of the property. Okay. I also like that it talks about including all existing means of access to the property. That's a clarification. That's actually come up in our brokerage a couple times this year about how do we define possession. That is typically does require a key. So that has now been clarified in the purchase agreement. Okay. Next up is just maintenance of the property. So it's clarifying, and I don't panic. I'm going to explain this. I can see where this might make you a little nervous. They're now making in the purchase agreement, the sentence about maintenance of the property is tied to closing instead of possession. Here's why. Now, if you're not delivering possession at closing, you have this pre-closing possession or post-closing possession agreement. And that's where it would clarify that the maintenance of the property would also extend to post-closing time. The reason they're simplifying it here is because if you have pre-closing possession, you obviously still need to know that you're having the property in the same condition until closing. So a buyer is still covered, even if a seller has the property a few days after closing. That would just be in the post-closing agreement. Hopefully that makes sense. So you remember I think it was just last year that we added, or maybe the year before, that we added in the language about the sentences about leased property into the purchase agreement. They're actually pulling that back out now and putting it on an addendum. So that's the leased property agreement, addendum to the purchase agreement. And it'll be a little more involved to explain those terms of if you're selling a property with tenants in place. And then some significant changes here to the building use limitations section. So adding in if the buyer intends to use it as a rental, whether that's long or short term, and then clarifying basically whether or not it's contingent on satisfying these building use limitations. And then also adding in this paragraph about rental cap or other restrictions that may prevent the buyer from using the property as they've indicated. And then again, continuing to spell out what that diligence period looks like and how they basically can exit the agreement, pardon me, if the building use is not satisfied. Okay. That's just the why. This is just a little tiny change. There is language in here that talks about inspections required by FHA or VA. They're just adding in USDA into that. So not a giant deal. That's just about inspections related to a specific mortgage type. And that's it for the purchase agreement. So nothing too crazy. I think the possession thing is probably the most significant. And then you'll want to get familiar with that building use limitation stuff. And then for those of you who are selling a lot of leased properties, you'll want to study that leased agreement to make sure you're clear on the language in that form. Again, these will all appear January 2nd. Okay, so this is just a simple change. So on buyer's inspection response, you guys all know about the additional days in the purchase agreement. You'll say I have 10 days for inspection, and then I have an additional 5 days. This change is just clarifying because realtors have such a hard time determining deadlines. So it's just saying that if you are exercising your right to those additional days, that they shall begin at the end of the initial inspection period. So for example, if I have 10 days and on day 7, I already know I'm going to need the additional 5. If I request them on day 7, they still don't start until the 10 are over. So pretty, I think, self-explanatory situation. And then first right contingency. So a lot of you have gotten more experience with first rights in the last 12 months than you've had in the years prior. Just a couple little tweaks to that addendum. The first one is basically just clarifying whenever you're dealing with the first right, of course, you've got so many purchase agreements flying around and it can be kind of confusing. So they're just clarifying which purchase agreement we're talking about. And you know that it says that the subsequent purchase agreement may or may not be subject to a first right. They're now just adding in whether it may or may not be subject to a limited purchase contingency, basically just clarifying whether or not that the second purchase agreement that would bump the first right out of place may or may not be a contingent offer. That's just the language clarified. And then 2 new forms this year. So I've already referenced the leased property addendum to the purchase agreement. So I don't have those. I can't show those to you yet. We won't see those until January 2nd. We just know they're coming. But I think the most significant change of all of these changes probably is that there will now be a buyer's notice of termination. So currently there is a seller's notice of termination. There are 5 reasons a seller can terminate an agreement and the buyer doesn't get any say in it. Well, buyers are finally getting their moment with their own notice of termination. There are a couple different reasons. Anyone want to try to guess why a buyer would be able to terminate without a mutual release, would be able to just say, nope, we're out? Anybody? Any guesses? Okay, I'll tell you. So the first one is basically to rescind a backup offer. So if you have a backup offer in place and you are the buyer and you find a house you like better, you can actually just send a notice of termination to the seller. You don't have to get the seller to sign off on a release of that. So that's the first one. The second one is the this one is big news. With an as-is addendum, buyers will now be able to send a notice of termination instead of a mutual release. So if a non-disclosed defect comes up on that inspection, a buyer now can just terminate the agreement and get their earnest money back, and seller doesn't have to sign a release. I think that's a significant change, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Like I said, these forms will come out. I've now said it 3 times. Sorry, I'm being very repetitive. January 2nd, they will just auto-populate into DocuSign in .loop. I just don't want anyone to be thrown for a loop because it happens. It inevitably happens. Somebody somewhere in January calls me and goes, what on earth is going on? So I think it's just a good exercise. Sometime make yourself a note maybe that first week to at least take a look at that purchase agreement and maybe those other forms. Yes, ma'am. Stacy, do you have a question?
Yes. So I hate that change so much.
The as is.
Huh?
The as is.
The like buyer termination for something that's not disclosed, because something I run into this year, we've always like hounded our sellers, disclose everything, go crazy on your disclosure. Well, we had a lender and it was a conventional mortgage, and they were requesting things that the seller disclosed be repaired. And so I just feel like there's such a tightrope now, but like you want your client to disclose, but it ended up costing them a whole lot of extra money because of the lender. And that is so brutal.
But would you, that is awful, but wouldn't you, I think this seller still has an obligation to disclose those things, right?
Yeah, it was more like this was the item. The item was their sidewalk outside, like walking into their house, like settled a little bit. So there was like a 2-inch little like lip or whatever. And they just wanted people to know that that was there if they couldn't see it with their eyes, so that they wouldn't request it on inspection. And the lender was like, we need to make sure that that's not a foundation problem. And I'm like, it's the sidewalk walking up to the house. But we had to have a foundation expert. We had to prove that they were legit. I mean, we just had to jump through all these hoops. And it was simply because the seller was just trying to be so prudent on their disclosure form.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I
I
know
don't really have a solution or a question.
I won't throw lenders.
Yeah.
I would say best practice is still typically to disclose, obviously. And I think with this as is, I mean, the as is addendum has always said that a buyer can release and get their earnest money back for a defect. I think this just kind of simplifies it in that the seller doesn't have to sign the release form anymore. And I think that's really important that you make sure that sellers understand that when they're accepting as is addendums. I definitely continue to see issues where sellers are frustrated because they heard as is and they didn't understand what that really meant. So make sure that you're explaining that to your sellers, that after that inspection, a buyer can literally just send that notice of termination. So that's all I have today. Looking forward to, unless there's any other questions. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning.
Thanks, Megan. If there are two people that get excited about form changes, it's Stacy Grove and Megan Sullivan. So I think it's an opportunity. I'm actually going to echo this tomorrow, by the way. Look, the forms aren't perfect, but I do think consistent forms is one of the values that our trade association provides to us in the industry. And it's just I don't need to be an apologist for any of your local or state or national associations, but I do think as an industry, it's worth just hitting pause for a second sometimes and saying, oh, okay, here is one of the ways that they're adding value. And I will reference here, I don't know how many of you have ever in some fashion been connected to a commercial transaction where it is common practice for one side of the transaction to have an attorney draft a letter of intent, and then you could have back and forth between two attorneys on a letter of intent that's then setting the stage for a back and forth between two attorneys for a contract. I think there's reasons for that. Commercial is obviously quite a bit different, but I'd say what, do a couple of those and you will really quickly be grateful for your state association to supply a set that is fairly comprehensive, a set of documents that nearly every residential broker in the state is comfortable using. The efficiency that creates for negotiations is a really big deal. So we could, on another call, talk about the things that we're not grateful for with IAR or NAR, but that's one. What I'm going to talk about tomorrow, Lawrence Yoon, who, yeah, as y'all know, I think he's the leading researcher and expert in housing market in the United States. We don't have access to him. His work doesn't exist without some portion of your National Association dues. And I think his information is really helpful. So back-to-back days of articulating value from IAR and NAR. Okay, and on that note, a little IAR transition here. Since Megan was looking at forms, once a month, I reference the IAR Housing Hub. Their data compilation that they've been running now for, I think this is probably about 2 years old. And I kind of advocate for it being a really good tool. And I was suggesting last week that it's a tool that each of you could kind of dive into and create some reports that were very applicable to markets or even like hyper sub-markets that you work in. And I think it's a really good thing to do as realtors. One of you reached out and was like, hey, could you show us, do a little deep dive on how that system works? And that was a great suggestion. So thanks, Beth, for that. So I'm going to spend probably 15 minutes just walking you through a couple of the things that I think are really helpful. It's fairly intuitive. I think the majority of you, if you spent 15 minutes it's data.indianarealtors.com. I'll show you in a second. Hi, Rosie. This is not tech. This is market research. Yes, they are using technology, I suppose. As far as tech goes, it's real simple. Although it does include an AI chat tool provided by Spark, which I learned a little bit about for this morning. So I guess we are going to hit on technology a little bit. But I'm just going to show how a few of the key reports are pulled. And then I would just encourage you at some point in time, carve out 30 minutes and dive into this thing. I think it will be worth your time. Beth, we'll talk about that later. Okay. So I'm in the home screen here. And if you don't remember data.indianarealtors.com, if you just Google IR Housing Hub, it comes up right away. This is their dashboard. I'm going to show you the things that I think are the most helpful. They publish, so one side of this, you see here, you've got blogs and kind of like pre-packaged reports that they do on a fairly regular basis. I would say
Hey, Mark.
Mark,
you haven't shared your screen.
I did, but hang on.
This is going swimmingly so far. Perfect.
There we go.
We see it now. Got it.
Okay, so you see up at the top of the dashboard, they do publish material either in the form of reports or blog entries that they're good. It can be a lot to stay on top of because they're actually kind of rapid fire. Not saying you wouldn't find value in any of those, but I don't see their blog material, their reports as necessarily really unique or, notably more valuable than other material that's out there like that. I think it is actually the tool itself, getting in and finding data that is relevant to you, that is the most unique. So you dive into some of the blogs, but I wouldn't necessarily prioritize that. It's the reporting feature, but really quick, I'll point out here this Spark version 1.0. This is actually an AI tool that was purchased of any company. I'm so fascinated by this. John Deere owns this tool, but it's a tool that's getting used in industry applications like this. So like some really big accounting platforms, I think a legal platform. Obviously, in this case, this is a real estate broker related platform. So like service industries are using this tool, and it's actually pretty interesting. If you don't consider yourself a data person, and getting into a tool like this and playing around with the reports is unenjoyable or intimidating, this is actually a pretty interesting filter. So I'll just show you. This is something that several of you have asked me about recently. Of any market that we work in, attached real estate in downtown Indianapolis has been on a really interesting ride in the last couple of years. And so I kind of ran this as a test, and I think it's actually a pretty interesting way to find reports that are relevant to you. Doesn't take very long. I ran this on, how are luxury homes in Newburgh doing? What is inventory like in West Lafayette? Some of these key things. And it produces really good answers and then references several relevant reports. And the thing I like about using this as opposed to, like, obviously there's plenty of other AI tools that you could ask similar questions. This is very specifically only pulling from IAR Housing Hub, which I think creates this like automatic layer of accountability in the data. So if we went to ChatGPT and asked how are condos in Indianapolis doing, it's pulling from a very wide data set, some of which you're going to have to comb through to determine, okay, but how reliable is this? So yeah, I think this is a really great kind of entry point into the tool. And yeah, sorry, I saw that question come across, Lisa. Yes, the tool is for the whole state. I'll show you in a moment how they're pulling. So basically IAR feeds data from every MLS in the state. That's actually a good transition here. So I'll go to reports. So they have all of these different reports. Essentially, they're broken down into either a 7-day period of time, a 30-day period of time, or year-to-date data compared to either 5 years back or 10 years back. Some I think are going to be more relevant to you. I'm going to show you a few that I think are really interesting. But this long-term year-to-date report, I'm going to show you this one because it's one that's locked. So anything that isn't locked is available to the public. Anything that is locked, you're going to need to log in. So I think I'm already logged in here. If you've never logged in, it's fairly simple. They'll just say, oh, are you new? Are you a member of IAR? Pretty quick process to get your access. So right here, Lisa, is where you would see. So right now, their default in every one of the reports is going to show me data for the state of Indiana. But I can come in here and choose what type of geography do I want to restrict this down to. The smallest that it goes is zip code. And there are, when I was playing around with Spark yesterday, for example, if you try to ask Spark a question about, say, a particular city or town, it might tell you, oh, I can't divide the data based upon that because I have to use county, zip code, or township, and sometimes those lines don't match up, but it will tell you that. And it will say, I think the most accurate information would be to use this zip code that would be very close to searching for that town. But yeah, a little interesting sidebar here. So if you look at the list of MLSs, this is how many MLSs exist in the state of Indiana. And yeah, it's kind of, it's really interesting. The Indiana Regional MLS, MIBOR, and NYRA. If you took IAR MLS and MIBOR, those are the two that we're members of. They make up the significant majority of the geography in the state. And then particularly if you added NYRA, you would have well over 90% of the state in those three MLSs. East Central, Richmond, Southeastern, Terre Haute, all very, very small MLSs. Sidebar that I'm from Richmond. I've talked to a few brokers in Richmond about this recently. Richmond and Terre Haute just like holding strong, operating their own MLSs, which is interesting conversation in its own right. But yeah, I think filtering by MLS is probably not something that you would typically do, but this is how IAR gets this data. So they're taking data from all these MLSs, mapping all of the different ways that they create those fields to a coherent database. What I typically do is metro area, association, congressional district, community type. I don't think those are going to be applicable very often. If you want to get more specific, which I will in a second, you could do zip code. But oftentimes I am doing metro area. That would be a starting point. So they have drawn these boundaries. Bloomington Market Service Area, that's what MSA is, Market Service Area. Here's one that would catch something like a third of the state would be the Indianapolis MSA. And that is essentially my board geography. There's a little difference there, but I'm going to pull this up for comparison. So this is year-to-date information that is comparing year-to-date information for that same area going 10 years back. And yeah, if you're looking for a data point that we often highlight, this is one, right? So you look at this and you say, oh, wow, we know what happened with inventory. Inventory here is trying to make its way back. So we have an uptick in new listings, which is good news for us. Then you look at sales, though, and you say, wait a minute, new listings are coming on much faster than they did in the previous 2 years, but yet closed sales are stagnant. This is one of the things that we'll talk about tomorrow as a reason to be optimistic for next year. Median days on market, median sale price. I thought this one was pretty interesting. You look at what happened from 2020 to 2022, right? Or somewhere right here, right before 2020. Very big jump, like outside the norm in terms of the rate of increase here in median sale price. But you guys hear me talking about this a lot. I think this is what these 10-year comparisons are really good at doing. Do you notice what's happened with prices since 2022? We all know it's because of, interest rates go up in 22, price growth slows. I think the typical consumer believes that values in housing just go through these like massive up and down swings. Charts like this actually suggest otherwise, that if you look at this deviation from 15 to 19, we see a very consistent increase in prices. If you remove the pandemic and the subsidized interest rates that followed, and you said, okay, if we continued on that steady increase, where would we be today? And it would put you at about $285,000, $290,000. So in other words, we're just on this steady correction. Correction doesn't mean price drop. It means several years of slow increase, right? Moving back to where this line would have landed us. So just, one little side note. Okay, but I'm going to jump back in and look at something very specific. So here is kind of 1A of what I would suggest each of you do to create a report that you could come back to that might be valuable in, I saw Beth, you just pointed this out. Where do I see this applying? Real estate reviews for sure. I think listing presentations, right? We've talked a lot about this. The conversation with sellers right now, in the vast majority of instances, the conversation with sellers needs to be very, very different than it has been for the last several years. How do you go about doing that? Data, right? Data takes it out of I, Mark Nottingham, am bringing bad news to my seller. That's not the nature of the conversation that we want. What we'd much rather have is I'm bringing service. The marketplace is bringing good news or bad news, right? The data is bringing the good news or bad news. The more we can do that. So monthly market report right here up at the top, I think it's their best summary. So if we go in here, I'm going to choose zip code, and this is the zip code that I live in. So I'm going to choose that. I'm most likely going to be talking to a seller of a single family home. So I'm going to choose detached single family home, view report. So this is a fairly specific report, right? There's not a whole lot of market activity that happens in one zip code in a 30-day period of time. We can get into this and maybe, rewind there, going back to the year to date. sometimes we'd get into this and say, gosh, this isn't enough information. I can do the same thing in the year to date report that was lower there. But this is good stuff. Like I think this is worthwhile. So if I was listing, especially if I was going to list a house right now in 46202 that wasn't like premium value interest, like, so right now there's a particular price point in my zip code that's doing just fine, but there's a couple of price points that I know are not doing well. This is a good tool to create a report that I could take with me, that takes it out of my hands and puts it into the hands of the data. This would be, if I was looking at a couple key points here, it'd be right here at the bottom. What's happened in median sales price and what's happened with price as a percentage of list. Median sale price down 27% in a zip code year over year. And sale price as a percentage of list price down 3% to 93. That 93 number, I look at this information a lot. I happen to know that in the state of Indiana, that number is hovering around 95, 95.5, right? So that would allow me to say, hey, within our larger marketplace, homes are typically selling at 95 or 96% of list price. This is pretty interesting to me, is that days on market are now at 68, which is higher than a year ago. Price is 27% lower, and sellers are having to negotiate more than they did previously, right? You put those three things together, and that sets the stage for me to say, pricing this property correctly and not overshooting it is going to be really important for us. Last thing I'll say, and I'll just stop sharing. There's a lot in there, but this is why I'm saying, hey, take 30 minutes, dive in, try out Spark. If you're like, I don't want to take the time to figure out what report I need, let the Spark tool tell you. It might even not take you 30 minutes. But I'll also say this, I'm available if you really like. I would say dive in, and if in 30 minutes you haven't navigated to something that you think is very helpful for your specific business, text me, call me, we'll jump into it together. I don't think it's going to take much time, and I think it's a way for you to be the expert, right? This data, the majority of it is available to the public. Only, you notice only a couple of those reports are locked. We all know consumers are more likely to see a headline in a non-real estate specific publication, or worse, commentary on social media. That's how they are creating their reference point for housing. So you coming in with data like this, I think establishes the fact that, like, oh, right, that's why I'm considering hiring a realtor. Is they're not going to listen to the noise of the headlines. They're not paying attention necessarily to the temperature on social media. They're looking at the best compilation of data in our marketplace. So I really think that sets the tone, makes you the expert. And y'all, it's not just about, yeah, that's exactly right, Beth. Good point. That show them, don't tell them. I'll end with this. Consider that coming into a conversation with a buyer or a seller with data like this makes them more likely to listen to your advice that you're giving them on inspections. I think it actually carries that far. You're starting the conversation non-aggressively, but simply by showing and providing. You're starting the conversation by setting the tone of, like, I'm the expert. And so therefore, when the transaction hits that inflection point, they are more likely to listen and respect to your guidance. So appreciate y'all. For those that are not data inclined, particularly appreciate you sticking with that. Hope y'all have a great Wednesday, and hope that we get to see many of you in person tomorrow.